My name is Myra Kesler, and on the night my husband slapped me in front of 600 people, the chandeliers did not stop sparkling. The violinists kept playing for 3 full seconds after his hand hit my face. Crystal glasses still clinked softly against silver forks. Women in diamond necklaces still smiled politely because wealthy people are trained to pretend discomfort is elegance. And in the center of that ballroom, with blood gathering slowly on my lower lip, I realized something terrifying. Not one person moved. Not one. 600 people watched a man strike his wife beneath a banner that read "Celebrating Mothers, Celebrating Family," and the only thing louder than the slap was the silence that followed it. Then my mother-in-law raised her champagne glass. And people laughed. Not because it was funny. Because cowardice is contagious. I remember looking around that ballroom and thinking something so calm it frightened me. None of you know who my mother is. Because if they had known Elena Novak, they would have understood something important. Women like my mother do not raise daughters to collapse. They raise daughters to survive long enough to leave. 48 hours later, my husband, Grant Kesler, would stand before a judge and plead guilty to domestic battery. 3 months later, Judith Kesler's beloved charity foundation would be placed under state investigation. And 6 months later, I would sit barefoot in my mother's tiny kitchen eating stuffed cabbage rolls while rain tapped against the windows and nobody, not one person, told me where I belonged. But none of that began at the gala. Stories like this never begin with a slap. They begin with the first humiliation you excuse because you are in love. The first silence. The first joke at your expense. The first time someone hurts you gently enough that you convince yourself it was accidental. Mine began 3 years earlier, the day I married into the Kesler family. I grew up in Akron, Ohio, in a studio apartment above a laundromat that smelled permanently of bleach and steam. 1 bedroom. 1 bathroom. 1 tiny kitchen with yellowing linoleum floors. And 1 extraordinary mother. Elena Novak immigrated from Romania when she was 23 years old, carrying $400, 2 sweaters, and a phrase book with broken English translations. She liked to joke that America greeted her with snow, debt, and bus schedules she could not understand. During the day, she worked as a court interpreter. At night, she studied law in public libraries because she could not afford heat strong enough to keep our apartment warm through winter. I used to wake up at 2 in the morning and find her asleep over legal textbooks with highlighters still clutched in her hand. She failed the bar exam once. Then took it again. Passed on her 2nd attempt. 31 years old. Single mother. No safety net. No wealthy husband. No family money. Just stubbornness sharpened into discipline. Elena had one rule she repeated throughout my childhood so often it became scripture. No crying without a plan. Tears are data. They tell you something is wrong. Then you fix it. At 8 years old, I thought it sounded harsh. At 33, it saved my life. I was a good student because failure felt expensive in our apartment. I graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State on a full scholarship in health administration. My first job was in hospital compliance. $52,000 a year. I remember calling Elena after signing the offer letter. We did it, I told her. She corrected me immediately. No, you did it. That was another thing about my mother. She never used sacrifice as a leash. She gave freely and expected me to become free in return. For a long time, I thought the hardest part of my life was over. Then I met Grant Kesler. Grant was charming in the dangerous way wealthy men often are. Not flashy. Not loud. He listened carefully. Remembered details. Looked directly into your eyes when you spoke. We met at a hospital fundraiser where I was reviewing donor compliance reports. He asked intelligent questions about my work. Most men heard compliance department and their eyes glazed over. Grant leaned closer. That sounds like the people who catch everyone lying. I laughed. More or less. That must make dating difficult. I should have understood then that he already knew exactly what kind of woman I was. Careful. Observant. Hard to fool. And yet somehow he fooled me anyway. For 6 months, he was thoughtful and attentive. Sunday coffee dates. Late-night phone calls. Flowers sent to my office for no reason. He proposed in October on a bench in German village while orange leaves blew across the sidewalk. The ring cost more than my car. The first red flag arrived disguised as humor. Mom needs to approve it first, he joked after slipping the ring onto my finger. I laughed automatically. Grant didn't. That should have mattered more than it did. Judith Kesler entered my life like a woman inspecting property she had not agreed to purchase. Elegant. Controlled. Impossibly polished. She wore cream-colored cashmere even indoors and spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed immediately. Within 72 hours of our engagement, she had inserted herself into every wedding decision. The venue. The menu. The flowers. The guest list. Even the music. I wanted my mother's Romanian stuffed cabbage rolls served during cocktail hour. Judith smiled thinly. That may confuse people. Confuse them? They were cabbage rolls, not explosives. But I swallowed my irritation because I thought compromise was maturity. I thought patience would eventually earn acceptance. That is the lie many women are taught. If you bend enough, eventually people will soften. Sometimes they simply learn how far you can bend before you break. On my wedding day, Elena handed me a folded silk handkerchief embroidered with her name in pale blue thread. Elena. Tiny, careful stitches. For happy tears? I teased. She touched my cheek. For whatever comes. I tucked it into my purse and forgot about it. I would carry it for 3 more years before understanding why she gave it to me. Harold Kesler died 21 years before I married his son. Heart attack. 54 years old. He left behind millions, a building materials company, and a wife who transformed grief into control. Judith managed the trust fund with military precision. Grant received monthly supplements. So did his younger sister, Paige. Every major purchase required Judith's approval. Homes. Vacations. Cars. Donations. Everything. She called it stewardship. But stewardship does not require emotional permission slips. Control does. And Grant had lived under it for so long he no longer recognized it as abnormal. I learned quickly that the Kesler family operated like a monarchy. Judith was queen. Everyone else survived by keeping her pleased. The first Thanksgiving after our wedding shattered whatever illusions I still carried. I brought Elena's stuffed cabbage rolls. 12 of them. Wrapped carefully in pickled cabbage leaves and simmered for hours. I set them on the dining table proudly. Judith lifted the foil. Looked inside. Set it down again. Then she said 5 words that would echo through the next 3 years of my life. She is not one of us. The room went still. Paige laughed first. Grant stared at his plate. Nobody defended me. Nobody even looked uncomfortable enough. Judith turned toward Paige casually. Get the real food from the kitchen. I carried the dish back to my car and sat in silence with the windows fogging around me. I did not cry. I heard Elena's voice instead. Tears are data. So I gathered data. That night, I created a folder on my laptop called Insurance. At the time, I did not know what I was protecting myself from. I only knew I would someday need proof that what I felt was real. The insults became smaller and sharper over time. Paige mocked my clothes. Judith mocked my background. Grant laughed just enough to avoid defending me. That hurt most of all. Cruelty from strangers wounds you. Cruelty tolerated by someone who promised to love you changes your understanding of yourself. Year 2 brought the group chat. Real Keslers. For members. Not me. I discovered it accidentally while Grant slept beside me. I read messages that made my stomach turn cold. Photos of me at brunch captioned with insults. Jokes about my mother's accent. Comments about my cheap upbringing. And Grant is participating. Not aggressively. Not directly. Just emojis. Laughing faces. Thumbs up. Approval without accountability. That was Grant's specialty. He rarely threw the knife. He simply handed it to someone else. I screenshotted everything. 47 images. Saved them into Insurance. Then I returned his phone exactly where I found it and lay awake until dawn staring at the ceiling beside the man I no longer fully recognized. By year 3, Judith's annual Mother's Day Gala had become the center of her identity. 600 guests. Politicians. Hospital executives. business owners. The ballroom at Briarwood Country Club transformed into a glittering monument to Judith Kesler's generosity every spring. She assigned me volunteer duties: greeting guests, printing badges, organizing seating charts. Visible but unimportant. Useful but silent. I agreed to everything because compliance work teaches patience. People reveal themselves when they underestimate you. 2 weeks before the gala, I noticed discrepancies in the foundation records. Donation totals did not match public displays. Vendor payments traced back to companies that barely existed. Shell disbursements. Small enough to avoid scrutiny. Large enough to matter. My instincts sharpened immediately. Numbers tell stories. And these numbers were screaming. I compiled everything carefully. Dates. Invoices. Comparisons. Vendor addresses. Screenshots. Professional formatting. No emotion. Only facts. Then I mailed copies to Elena. Insurance. Always insurance. A week before the gala, I overheard Judith and Paige discussing me inside the pantry. They thought I was upstairs. Paige laughed softly. She'll react. She always does. Judith's answer chilled me. That's the point. They had planned the speech. Planned the humiliation. Planned to provoke me publicly until I appeared unstable and emotional. They wanted confirmation of the narrative they had been building for years. Poor girl from Akron. Too sensitive. Too emotional. Too common. They expected tears. A scene. Maybe shouting. What they never expected was stillness. Stillness terrifies cruel people because it gives them nowhere to hide. The night before the gala, I discovered Harold Kesler's letter hidden inside Grant's desk drawer. 2 yellowed pages. Written months before his death. I read them sitting on the floor beneath dim office light while the house slept around me. One sentence carved itself into my memory permanently. Your mother is a strong woman, but strength is not the same as kindness. If your wife ever tells you she is hurting, believe her. Do not make the mistake I made. I photographed the letter carefully and returned it exactly where I found it. Harold had understood his wife completely. He simply lacked the courage to stop her. Now his son was repeating the same failure. The gala arrived warm and humid beneath a cloudless May sky. Briarwood Country Club glittered with white roses and gold lighting. I wore a navy dress and flat shoes because I knew I would spend hours standing. Paige handed me a cheap name tag. First name only. Not Mrs. Kesler. Just Myra. A tiny humiliation. Designed deliberately. People think abuse is always screaming and bruises. Sometimes it is death by 1,000 carefully crafted reminders that you do not belong. For 90 minutes I greeted guests with a smile. A retired teacher named Deborah Aldridge shook my hand warmly. You must be Grant's wife, she said kindly. Lucky man. I almost laughed at the irony. Inside the ballroom, Grant sat at table 1 drinking champagne beside his mother. He never once came to find me. At 8:15, Judith took the stage. The room applauded instantly. She loved applause the way some people love oxygen. Her speech began predictably. Sacrifice. Motherhood. Family values. Then the tone shifted. Some women marry into families they do not appreciate, she announced. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. They bring foreign customs and expect everyone else to adapt. The air changed. People sensed danger but remained seated. That is another truth I learned about cruelty. Most witnesses stay passive as long as discomfort remains socially inconvenient. Then Judith looked directly at me. Real mothers raise their children with values we understand. Not in studio apartments working as, what was it again? Translators. My mother. On Mother's Day. Mocked publicly by a woman whose entire lifestyle depended on inheritance. Something inside me became very calm. I stood slowly from table 47. 600 eyes followed me across the ballroom. I stopped below the stage and looked up at Judith. My mother worked 3 jobs while putting herself through law school, I said clearly. She never needed charity galas to prove she was a good mother. The room held its breath. Judith switched instantly into victimhood. Tears filled her eyes. Do you see? She cried dramatically. Do you see how she attacks me? Then Grant approached. Drunk. Flushed. Angry. Apologize to my mother, he demanded. No. One syllable. That was all. His hand struck my face hard enough to split my lip. The microphone amplified the sound through the entire ballroom. The slap echoed against crystal chandeliers and marble walls. And for 3 horrifying seconds, nobody moved. I tasted blood. Judith smiled. A small smile. Satisfied. Like a woman watching a prediction come true. Then came the laughter. Soft. Nervous. Cowardly. I reached into my pocket and pressed Elena's handkerchief against my mouth. White silk turned red. Still, I did not cry. I looked around the room carefully. 600 people. Only one woman stood. Deborah Aldridge. A retired schoolteacher. 70 years old. She was the only person brave enough to move toward me. That mattered more than she would ever know. I walked out of the ballroom without another word. Behind me, Paige called out loudly. Drama queen. Grant shouted after me. You're overreacting. And Judith's voice floated through the speakers like poison. She'll come crawling back. They always do. No. Not this time. I sat alone in my car shaking silently while blood dried against my chin. Then I called Elena. Mom, please come. She understood immediately. No questions. No panic. Only instructions. Do not wash your face. Do not change your clothes. Lock your doors. I'll be there in 40 minutes. When Elena arrived, she stepped out wearing flat shoes and a black coat thrown hastily over a house dress. No makeup. Reading glasses still perched atop her head. She looked at my face for 10 full seconds without speaking. Then she said calmly, Okay, here is what we do. Not, are you okay? Not, poor baby. A plan. Because panic never saved anyone. Evidence did. She photographed my injuries. Then she took my hand and walked me back inside. The ballroom quieted instantly when we entered together. Judith approached first, furious. If you're here to apologize. Elena interrupted smoothly. My name is Elena Novak. I am here because your son assaulted my daughter in front of 600 witnesses. The entire room froze. Battery is not a family matter, Elena continued. It is a criminal matter. Everything changed in that moment. The illusion shattered. Because abusers survive through privacy. Public truth suffocates them. Grant tried pleading. Judith tried crying. Paige tried minimizing. Then I spoke again. There's also the matter of the missing $60,000 from the foundation accounts. Silence exploded across the ballroom. Judith's face drained white. I explained calmly. Vendor discrepancies. Shell companies. Donation mismatches. Every word precise. Professional. Documented. The room listened. And for the first time in 3 years, Judith Kesler lost control of it. She screamed. Insulted my mother. Called me an immigrant's daughter. Accused me of destroying her family. The microphone amplified every word. Then an off-duty police sergeant offered quietly. Would you like me to call this in? Yes, I answered. 12 minutes later, Officer Morales arrested Grant in front of 600 guests. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists beside table 1 while Judith watched in horror. I remember looking at her and thinking something unexpected. Not hatred. Relief. Because monsters only appear powerful until someone finally turns the lights on. The weeks afterward unfolded quickly. Grant accepted a plea deal. Mandatory counseling. Community service. Protective order. The divorce moved fast because I had spent years preparing emotionally long before filing legally. That is something many people misunderstand about women who leave. We do not leave suddenly. We leave in pieces long before we walk out the door. Every humiliation loosens another brick. Every betrayal opens another crack. By the time we physically leave, our hearts have often been gone for years. Judith's foundation fell under state investigation after I submitted the financial discrepancies. The Gala was suspended. Independent auditors arrived. Paige lost her job. And suddenly, the Kesler family discovered what life feels like without absolute control. I did not celebrate. That surprises people when I tell this story. They expect revenge to feel euphoric. It doesn't. It feels heavy. Quiet. Necessary. Mostly, it feels like exhaustion finally ending. 3 months later, I moved into a small apartment back in Akron. One bedroom. One bathroom. A kitchen window overlooking maple trees. The first night there, I sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by unpacked boxes eating Chinese takeout straight from the carton. Nobody criticized my clothes. Nobody mocked my mother. Nobody told me where I belonged. Silence felt holy. I accepted a position as compliance director for a regional healthcare nonprofit. My salary increased. My confidence returned slowly, not dramatically. Healing rarely arrives dramatically. It arrives in ordinary moments. The first full night you sleep without anxiety. The first meal you eat without defending yourself. The first morning you wake up and realize nobody is angry at you. Those moments matter more than grand victories. Every Sunday, I drove to Elena's house for dinner. Stuffed cabbage rolls. Coffee brewing. Law journals stacked beside the table. One rainy evening, Elena asked quietly, "How do you feel?" I thought about it carefully before answering. Like I can breathe again. She nodded once, as if that was the outcome she had been waiting for all along. Months later, I received a handwritten card in the mail. From Deborah Aldrich, the retired teacher who stood up when nobody else did. Inside, she wrote, "Proud of you, dear. Some lessons require courage to teach." I cried when I read it. Not because I was sad. Because survival feels unbearably lonely until someone witnesses it kindly. I pinned the card to my refrigerator. It is still there today. People often ask whether Grant ever apologized sincerely. He tried. Twice. The first apology arrived by email 3 weeks after the arrest. Long paragraphs blaming alcohol, stress, his mother, pressure, and childhood trauma. Everything except himself. The second came nearly a year later after therapy. Shorter. Cleaner. I became someone my father warned me not to become. That line stayed with me. Because it was true. Generational damage survives through silence. Harold stayed silent with Judith. Grant learned silence. Then cruelty. Then obedience. Until eventually he confused loyalty with surrender. I did not hate him anymore by then. I simply understood him too clearly to love him safely. There is a difference. As for Judith, I saw her once more nearly 2 years later. At a grocery store. No makeup. Smaller somehow. Older. Control had drained out of her life, and without it, she looked almost fragile. She froze when she recognized me. For a second, I expected anger. Instead, she asked quietly, "How is your mother?" I stared at her, stunned. "Happy," I answered. Judith nodded slowly, as if the word physically hurt. Then she walked away. I watched her disappear down the frozen food aisle, pushing a shopping cart alone. And something inside me settled permanently. Because I finally understood her. Judith had spent her entire life terrified. Terrified of being powerless. Terrified of being abandoned. Terrified of becoming the poor, unwanted girl she once was before marrying Harold Kesler. So she built a kingdom from control. But control is not love. Fear is not strength. And families built on obedience eventually collapse under the weight of performance. Today, my life is quiet. Beautifully quiet. I still work in compliance. I still visit Elena every Sunday. I still make stuffed cabbage rolls using her recipe, though mine never taste quite as good. Sometimes women write to me after hearing my story. Women married into families that shrink them. Women who apologize for existing too loudly. Women waiting for permission to leave. I always tell them the same thing. The slap is never the beginning. It is only the first moment you finally stop explaining away what has been happening all along. And leaving is not failure. Sometimes, leaving is the first honest thing you do. My mother taught me that. Not through speeches. Not through lectures. Through example. Through survival. Through courage practiced quietly over decades. No crying without a plan. I understand now what she meant. Tears are not a weakness. They are information. Your body is telling you something is wrong. Your soul refusing to stay silent. The important part is what comes after. The plan. The leaving. The rebuilding. The choosing yourself after years of disappearing inside someone else's expectations. That is the real story. Not the slap. Not the arrest. Not the scandal. The real story is this. A little girl grew up watching her mother survive impossible things with dignity. And one day, when her own life began breaking apart in a ballroom full of strangers, she remembered what she had been taught. Stand up. Stay calm. Gather evidence. Leave with your dignity intact. And never crawl back to people who mistake your kindness for permission to hurt you.